All right, she's back again with us from the Texas Signal, the features and opinions editor over there. Jessica Coggins joins us back on the Can We Please Talk podcast. Jess, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping back on the podcast with us.
Well, it's great to see y'all, although I know that we are talking over some very tragic circumstances that have been happening.
Jessica, I'm so glad that you said that. I want to get first your takeaways on the tragedy in Uvalde. You and I are both members of the Hispanic community. I know Uvalde is a predominantly Hispanic town, a small town. You're a Texan yourself. Give me some of your early takeaways when you heard about this tragedy. Is it something for you that says like, oh, not again? Or is it because of the way the gun culture is down there? Is this something that, are we just becoming numb to this specifically in the state of Texas?
I mean, there's a lot of factors that played into this. Now you will hear many, especially on the Texas GOP, those factors will be things like doors or video games, mental health crises. That's not to say maybe there aren't some things, but the number one thing is still guns. And here in Texas, this is an easy place to get guns. And this is what happened with this individual who was 18 years old. That is, you cannot purchase alcohol, you cannot purchase chewing tobacco, but he was able to acquire an AR-15. And he goes into this school, and we all saw the images, and they were so tragic. 19 children were killed, 2 teachers were killed. The spouse of one teacher, Joe Garcia, he died essentially of a brief heart attack 2 days later. And then that's not even to say the amount of PTSD that is going to occur for this community, for those children, for those families. For me, it was one of those things when, as it was unfolding, it feels like, how can this happen? But also, we know that this happened. Why aren't we stop another one from happening?
Jessica, it's obviously reminiscent of what we all saw, specifically to those in Texas about El Paso, not too long ago. Under this recent administration, is the feeling that there is almost an expansion of access to guns, or a further deregulation as opposed to other states in the country?
In Texas, after El Paso, the Governor Greg Abbott, he did say that, we will look at options. That did not end up happening. They did not call a special session into the Texas legislature. In Texas, the legislature meets every 2 years. So the last session was in 2021. And, sure enough, we actually ended up passing more gun laws, including permitless carry. So now any individual over the age of 21 who is not a felon, they do not require a permit to carry a handgun throughout the state. And that's just one of several laws that have been passed in the last couple of years. I was at an event for Beto O'Rourke, and he mentioned the fact that since Abbott has been in office 7 years, the number of children that have died by gunfire has doubled. And I mean, that's truly alarming when you think about it. Like, why should anybody have to live in this environment? I feel so, I'm not a parent, but I can't imagine, what it's like to be in this environment and having to explain to your kids about what's happening, and for them to also go through these safety drills, armed shooter trainings. That just seems wildly unfair.
Jessica, you just mentioned Beto a moment ago. Obviously the media has sort of paid attention a little bit to also what's going on there, just with his speaking out about what's going on, a much needed voice in the state of Texas right now as it relates to discussing guns. And from a policy standpoint, from what you witnessed the other day, just in paying attention to his campaign, what, if anything, feels different about Beto's momentum in this race for the governorship as opposed to the Senate race from years past?
I think that people have gotten used to his level of candor. So, maybe a couple of years ago, people weren't used to the swearing or some of the colloquialisms he would use, his very direct way of talking, which is actually, I think, what attracted a lot of people to his campaign in the first place. He didn't necessarily sound like your cut and dry politician. In the aftermath of the shooting, he actually confronted Abbott and a number of other Republicans. You can go back to the video and you'll actually hear the mayor of Uvalde call him a son of a bee, basically. And, in the town hall that I witnessed in Dallas recently, he was also very candid about the fact that he's a father. And he brought up the fact that he spent the last week with his 3 children, and that very much imbues a lot of his passion for this topic. So that, I think, is something that people do credit. He also mentioned that he met with the parents of one of the young children that was killed, Alethea Rodriguez, and he really just wanted to listen to what her parents wanted. And I think people appreciate that, and basically telling them, like, whatever we can do, we will do our best to do, so no other family has to go through this level of trauma.
Jessica, let's talk about his opponent coming November in Governor Abbott. I know you've been watching some of these press conferences unfold from Governor Abbott and also from the town as well. It just, to the outsider watching some of these things play out, it looks like law enforcement's actions and inactions cost lives. But then the information that trickled up to the governor as well, not everyone was on the same page. Have you ever seen something like this play out in the state before? I don't know the way the other shootings, the information kind of trickled, or the way law enforcement responded to some of those can be correlated to what happened in Uvalde. But have you seen any type of correlation to some of these, the way information's trickling and not trickling out to the media and onward, upwards, up the chain?
I do think that we are getting a lot of different stories from law enforcement, a lot of lack of cooperation. I think that has been something that has been pretty across the board, not just in Texas, but across the country. The big difference is there is a huge media spotlight on this case, and people want to know why it took 78 minutes, for them finding out about the shooter being in the school to then going in. So that, to me, I think is the biggest reason we're getting a lot of this. And I mean, this is for people who are a little surprised by the people who run basically the city of Uvalde. South Texas is going to be very different than a lot of your larger cities like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. Even though it does have a majority Latino population, their mayor is white. He's very, very Republican. He actually did not support Greg Abbott. He lent his support to a primary opponent of Greg Abbott and talked about it on Tucker Carlson's show about a year ago when Tucker invited him on for his special his
Tuckerness. You can say that. Right.
But I will say that, the level of just changing stories has been pretty notable. I mean, almost every hour you're learning, oh, wait, this actually didn't happen. Oh, the teacher did close the door here. So, and even in, with a lot of media that is down there, they are getting confronted by a law enforcement group that does not want them to ask questions, to take pictures. They're saying that, the police, the area around the police force is private property, so they're being kicked off. So that, I think, is maybe also a reflection of the fact that people now know about the changing narratives of this tragedy.
Jessica, it's hard for anyone to, in either seeing or listening to you, note the combination of not resignation, but fatigue. I think many people in Texas are experiencing that. In just the circles that you're a part of, personally, professionally, as it relates to Texans, is there any sense of, even for those who are the most ardent gun supporters, that there's just a reckoning or a breaking point that we're arriving at due to recent events, and as part of the national dialogue about just gun regulation? Like, is there any tone that you're sensing in terms of a tonal shift in Texas with regards to the gun argument?
I mean, even in Texas, that obviously is quite conservative and has enacted a lot of these pro-gun policies, that actually runs a little counter to what the majority wants. Last year, when they passed permitless carry, I was covering a rally that our local Moms Demand Action chapter was doing, and they had commissioned a survey with a couple of other gun safety organizations that showed about 60% of Texans, do support some sort of form of background check. Permitless carry was actually not popular, even with law enforcement. A lot of the police unions spoke out against that law. But, we have a very, very Republican state legislature, and they are very afraid of primaries in a lot of these state House districts, state Senate districts. So they will stay very right on this issue. Just days after the shooting at Uvalde, the NRA had their annual convention in Houston. A number of my colleagues from the Signal, who are based out of Houston, attended the protest. But it's still very much business as usual with those guys. And they know that even if they don't necessarily have the money that they used to have, just due to, I think, the New York Attorney General's lawsuit, but they know that they still have these people who will always side with the gun lobby.
Yeah. You fed, by the way, perfectly into the NRA stuff. We were going to bring that up with the protest, but I wanted to bring up something that we were talking about in the first segment. And I'm asking you this as a Texan, as somebody who has lived there for a while now. You're covering local and state politics there. I don't understand how culture and guns got interwoven together. I don't get, it's not, to me, it's not a gun culture. Culture is, I am Cuban, right? We eat lechon, and we eat picadillo, and we celebrate Nochebuena and different type of holidays that bring us together from a cultural standpoint. Owning a gun is a hobby, I would argue. And if tomorrow, as a golf enthusiast, and I made this analogy in the first segment, if somebody said to if a bunch of people were buying golf clubs and killing people at a massive rate, and the government wanted to do something about regulating golf clubs, and maybe even coming to take my golf clubs, I would understand, as part of civility, as part of humanity, that we need to do something about this and jump on board, whether it being surrendering my golf clubs or stopping to play golf or anything that's analogous to this. But the difference is guns kill way more. Why is gun culture a thing? Specifically in Texas, I understand sensible gun ownership and maybe as a hobby, letting out some steam, going to the shooting range and stuff like that. But why is the argument always on one side of the political aisle, which shouldn't be on any political aisle? It's about guns. These are weapons that kill people. But why is it always gun culture? I've heard this from Mo Brooks about how he would carry guns to school. I mean, he said that in a Fox News interview, which is asinine. I've heard this from Louis Gohmert. Everybody's wrapping guns and culture together. Why do you feel that that's like that?
I think that there was something that shifted, in the last couple of decades, where you're right, it became sort of an identity for people. And this was, I read an interesting op-ed by Greg Sargent in the Washington Post recently, where the whole idea of owning the libs, there's something about the AR-15, which has come to symbolize that. And that has become an important weapon for people, even though if you are a hunter, an AR-15 is not going to serve you well, unless you don't want to eat the animal anymore or something. But that, I think, has been the biggest thing. Because you go back to the 1970s, the NRA was essentially just an outdoor organization. I think I even had relatives that might have been one-time members, just because they went hunting twice or three times a year or something like that. But then ultimately, I think they figured out that they could very much prey upon people's insecurities about maybe shifting demographics, about crime being on the rise. And you certainly also have these weapons manufacturers that, I mean, if you are to purchase a lot of these firearms, they are extremely expensive. This is not something that, just your average person can do. these things will set you back several thousands of dollars. So it's a lucrative business for these people. And they have also figured out just ways to I think, really accelerate sort of cultural hot button issues to make people paranoid, to make people afraid, to make them think that, yes, every single AR-15 I may have to use in some situation.
Just before we let you go, I wanted to ask you, because I reached out to you after you had posted a photo of attending Beto's town hall there. So, and you wrote a great piece that you could check out on the Texas Signal website. Tell us a little bit about, we're trying to hold feet to fire for politicians out there in terms of action, inaction. What were some of your takeaways from what Beto said in that town hall about things he would enact legislatively if he does become governor of Texas? And then as a follow-up, do you think he has a realistic chance? Last time you were on the show, we asked you about Matthew McConaughey. We know how that went. Do we think Beto has a realistic chance of actually becoming governor of the state of Texas?
Sure. So at this town hall, which was also the theme of it, was essentially about protecting children and how our current Republican Party has not done that. So he did lay out some concrete steps that he would like to take when it comes to gun safety, universal background checks, safety storage laws, and probably the big one, a red flag law. So in August of 2019, this was a couple of weeks after the El Paso shooting, there was a shooting in Midland, Odessa, perpetuated by someone whose own mother was actually very concerned about his mental health. However, he had a weapon, and because we do not have a red flag law in Texas, he was ultimately able to murder 7 people and injure 25. So if we'd had that red flag law, it's very likely that would not have happened. So those are some of the concrete things that Beto mentioned, but he also tied it into this larger notion of what Texas is and isn't doing for Texas children. A lot of Republicans have mentioned mental health in the aftermath of the Uvalde shooting. Well, we don't really fund mental health services in Texas. We actually rank 50th out of 51st in terms of access to mental health. One of the big reasons for that is because Texas is one of 12 states that has an expanded Medicaid. The largest provider of mental health services in the state of Texas is the Harris County Jail. So you will have people with very debilitating, serious conditions. They will purposefully get themselves arrested just to get mental health care. So, Beto brought that up. He also brought up the fact that a lot of the legislative priorities this last session were very much, conservative red meat issues that, banning trans athletes from playing on whatever sport matches their gender identity. I didn't realize that was that big of a thing in Texas, but apparently it was. It required a special session to do something like that. I don't really know who that is serving. And in fact, it's kind of preying upon the most vulnerable. So to sort of get to your question about, does Beto have a chance? It's uphill. I mean, this is a red state. Now in 2018, Beto lost to Ted Cruz by a little under 220,000 votes. In 2020, Donald Trump won this state by about 5.8 percentage points, the closest it's been, in many decades, and actually closer than a traditional swing states like Ohio and Iowa. But it's tough. And I think most people acknowledge 2022 is going to be a tough year for Democrats. That's all throughout the country. So Beto acknowledged that, he has a lot of work to do. Now, I will say he has a bunch of volunteers. I was just listening in on a call from his campaign where he said that they had 11,000 on the line, listening to updates. So, I think if he has a shot, if anyone could realistically do this, it would be Beto, but it's extremely uphill.
Well, Jess, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program. I know it's under tough circumstances and everything that happened down there in the school shooting. You can check out all of Jessica's work over at the TexasSignal.com. Follow her on social media. She's a great follow. Jess, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Truly appreciate it. Continued success to you. And please stay safe.
Thanks, guys. Y'all too.